Hello everyone, this is Manohar Reddy, Department of Cybersecurity, Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. Today I am going to explain you the concept on problem solving on MySQL constraints. Problem solving on MySQL constraints. So MySQL constraints. So constraints are nothing but what? Conditions. Conditions are nothing but what? The constraints which are applied to maintain the limits of the data. To maintain the limits or some particular specifications that allows specifications to the data. So here the constraints in MySQL is used to specify the rules. So we can call it as what? Constraints. We can call it as what? Conditions. We can call it as what? Rules. We can call it as what? Rules. So constraints, conditions, rules. So the constraints in MySQL is used to specify the rule that allows or restrict, that either allows or restrict what values or data will be stored in the table. What values or what data will be stored in the table. They provide a suitable method. To ensure data accuracy and integrity inside the table. So they provide a suitable method to ensure data accuracy as well as integrity inside the table. And it also helps to limit the type of data. So it provides what? Constraints, it provides conditions, it provides rules, it provides some limitations also. Limitations to the type of data. Limitations to the type of data will be inserted inside the table. So it follows with the constraints to apply conditions, to apply rules, to allow or deny, to allow or restrict the values or data will be stored on table, and that will be applies for the limit of the table also, limits of the table also. For all these, the constraints has to be applied. For all these, to do all this, the constraints have to be applied. So types of MySQL constraints. So generally, basically, there are two types of constraints are there. One is column level constraints. And the second one is what? Table level constraints. One is column level constraints and the second one is what? Table level constraints. So column level constraints are nothing but what? These constraints are applied only to the single column that limits the type of particular column data. So the constraints applied to the particular column of the data is called as what? Column level constraints. And the second one, table level constraints. These constraints are applied to the entire table that limits the type of data for a whole table. So that is nothing but all the columns has to be applied. So to apply all the columns has to be constrained with the different conditions, then it is either table level constraints. But for a single column you are applying means that is a column level constraints. So applying column level constraints or else applying table level constraints. So see, let us look one by one the table constraints and column constraints. So how to create constraints in MySQL? We can define the constraints during a table created by using create table statement. So we are creating the constraints during a table created. So during the creation of the tables only we can create the constraints also. So MySQL also uses the alter table statement. So MySQL is also uses alter table statements to specify the constraints. In the case of existing table schema. So to creating the table at the time of creation of the table only, you can create the constraints also. Constraints used in MySQL. So what are the types of constraints you are applied in the column level as well as table level? So see, let us look here. The following are the most common constraints used in the MySQL. The following are the most common constraints used in the MySQL. The first one is what? Not null constraint. First one is what? Not null constraints. And second one is what? Check constraints. Second one is what? Check constraints. The next default constraints. Default constraints. The next primary key constraints. Next primary key constraints. Auto increment constraints. Auto increment constraints. Unique key constraints. Unique key constraints. And last, foreign key constraints. Foreign key constraints. So let us explain one by one each other. So here the not null constraints. Not null constraints. This constraint specifies that the column cannot have a null or empty values. So that indicates that what? The constraint specifies that the column cannot have null or empty values. The column cannot have null or empty values. The below statement creates a table with not null constraints. That means a column must and should have some value at least. A column must and should have some values at the time. So to avoid that, to do not entering null values, so how can we create constraints? How can we create that constraints? Let us look here. So this is the syntax for creating. So we are also creating the constraints at the time of creating table only. So here, create table student. So student is the table name. Create table student. So student is the table name. So here the columns are ID is one column, last name is one column, first name is one column, and the city is one column. And here ID is the type of data, integer data, and the last name is text data, and the first name is also a text data. And the city also, a city is nothing but city varchar data. So now here the last name text is applied with the not null constraint. So last name text is applied with the not null constraints. And here first name text is also applied with the not null constraints. So that means in the field, if you are leaving that field, means it must and should asking you to enter some value. So same here, if you are not entering any value like last name and first name, it is generating some error messages. Generating some error message to specifies what the not null values. Specify that at least one value you need to specify. So like the way not null works here. So the last name and the first name should have to enter at least one value. Without enter means it generates an error message. That the column last name and first name should contain at least one value. And here to insert the values, same. So insert into student values of 1, Hanks, Peter, New York. But in the second case, insert into student 2 values of 2, null value, then next Amanda, Florida. So from the above syntax, we have to mention some value instead of null. So instead of using null, you have to mention at least one value. Otherwise, it shows the error like the column cannot be null. It shows the errors like what? Column should contain at least one value, or else column cannot be null. It is asking you to enter at least one value. So column cannot be null. The next, check constraints. So check constraints, it controls the value in a particular column. It ensures that the inserted value in a column must be satisfied with the given condition. So it must be satisfied with the given condition. In other words, it determines whether the value associated with the column is valid or not with the given condition. So here the column must be specified with the condition. So if the column value doesn't meet that condition, then it is not read the value, it is not going to insert the value. So the syntax here, the create table persons, create table persons. So id int not null, id int not null. So here the integer data type id is about to not null constraints, and the name is represented with the data type varchar, and it is also not null constraints. And the age is a data type with int. So here applying check constraints, here applying check constraints. So here check constraints is applying with the condition is what, age greater than equals to 18, age greater than or equals to 18. That means when you are going to enter the column age value, it specifies it must and should check the condition which you are entering the value with this condition. What is the condition? Age greater than equals to 18. So definitely you have to enter the value more than 18. So here let us take an example. Insert into persons id comma name comma age, and the values are 1 comma Robert 28, 2 comma Joseph 35, 3 comma Peter 40. And insert into persons id comma name age comma values 1 comma Robert 15. So from these two statements, the first statement is executed. The first statement executed and returns all values, and returns all values. But in this case, we can see that the first insert query executes successfully, but the second statement fails. And gives an error that says check constraints is violated for key age. So check constraints is violated for key age. So it is violated, the value which you are specifying for the condition is violating. So like the way it is specifies the condition. Next, default constraints. So default constraint, this constraint is used to set the default value. So this constraint is used to set the default value for the particular column where we have not specified any value. So if you don't want to specify any value at the time of inserting values, so it takes by default value. It means the column must contain a value. Including null. A column must contain a value including null also. So the syntax is here, create table persons id int not null. So id is the not null, and name varchar is also not null, and age int, and city varchar default is what, New York. So while you are entering all the values, if you are not specifying the city means it is taken by default New York as the city. It is taking by default New York as the city. So here the default value is what, New York. So mentioning that default constraint is to give the value New York as a default value. The New York as the default value. Next one, primary key constraints. So primary key constraint. This constraint is used to identify each record in a table uniquely. So it is used to identify each record in a table uniquely. If the column contains primary key constraints, then it cannot be null or empty. A table may have duplicate columns. But it can contain only one primary key. So table can have more than one duplicate values, but the primary key contains only one values. So it specifies that what the entered values are uniquely identified, and it does not take more than one values. It always contains unique value into a column. So create tables. Let us take example. Create table persons. ID int not null primary key. So indicates that what, ID is the column name, which constraints, which applied with the constraints both not null as well as primary key. That means the column should have some value, and that value is also an unique value. So id int not null space primary key indicates that what? The id is having at least one value, and that value must be the unique value. The value must be unique value. And the second one, name varchar not null. Name varchar not null. And age int. So age is also an integer data type. And the next city varchar of 25. So city is also a character var character data type. Now let us look at example. Insert into persons id, name, age, city, values of 1, Robert, 15, Florida, and 2, Joseph, 35, California, and 3, Peter, 40, Alaska. But now in the second case, see, insert into persons id, name, age, city, the values 1, Stephen, 15, Florida. So the value is inserted with the primary key inserted. The values are inserted with the primary keys. So automatically it takes for the next value second, third, fourth, like that. So if it is not taking, means if it is not identifying as the unique values, it is the fault for the primary key constraint. So for every primary key values, the all values should be unique values. All values should be unique values. And next one, auto increment constraints. Auto increment constraints. So this constraints automatically generates. This constraints automatically generates a unique number. A unique number. Whenever we insert a new record, whenever we insert a new record into the table, automatically it generates unique number. Automatically it generates unique number. So similarly, like an Excel sheet, we can drag and drop with the right number. So at that moment, if you drag and drop to the bottom line, then automatically the increment will be counted. So the same thing will be happened with this auto increment constraints. So generally, we use this constraint for the primary key field in the table. So where we can use this primary key field in the table. So example, let us take an example. So create table animals, id int not null, auto increment. So id int not null, auto increment. So here the primary key is not necessary. Primary key is not necessary to add, because the auto increment constraints is inbuilt with the primary key constraint. So automatically it identifies and it does not allows duplicates, means it automatically incremented one by one. And next one, name char of 30 not null, and a primary key id. Name primary key of id. So primary key of id which takes, and it is taken as a automatic increment. So in the example, insert into animals of name values of like what? Tiger, dog, penguin, camel, cat. So all these values will be taken as by default auto incremented 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values. So this is all about id, and this is the name. So the names are directly displayed with the tiger, dog, penguin, the next camel, the next cat, the next ostrich. So all these animal names will be identified with the auto increment values like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up to. So the values are displayed depending upon the number of names are inserted. And unique constraints. So what is meant by unique constraints? These constraints ensure that all values inserted into the column will be unique. All the columns values will be unique. So it means a column cannot store duplicate values. That means that column does not allows duplicate values other than IDs. Any other column names must be specified with the unique, means that does not allows duplicate values to enter. So here, create table shut brands. So shirt brands is the table name. Here it is creating with the integer and brand name unique. So the brand name is indicated with unique and the size varchar. So now the brand name is unique. That means you are not able to insert the value of the brand for one value to be another values. So at that moment it is, if you are assigning means, then it shows that what, an error. So let us see here. Insert into shirt brands ID, brand name, size, values of 1, pantaloons, 38. And the second one, Peter England, 40. So these three are the values we are inserting for the first time. But in the second time, we'll see, second time also, the values 1, Raymond, 38. And the second, Peter England, 40. At this moment, so from above, we can see that the first insert query executes correctly, but the second statement fails. Second statement fails and gives an error that says what? Duplicate entries Peter England for key brand name. Duplicate entry Peter England for key brand name. So it is not allowed to enter again and again because the brand name is assigned with the unique key constraints. Brand name is assigned with the unique key constraints. So at that moment, it is not allows you to enter duplicate values. And foreign key constraints. This constraint is used to link two tables together. And it is also known as the referencing key. A foreign key column matches the primary key field of another table. So a foreign key column matches the primary key field of another table. It means a foreign key field in one table refers to the primary key field of another table. So the referencing of the columns must be related with one table to another table. So referencing of the keys must be connected with the one table to another table. So then it is called as what? Foreign key. So foreign key field in one table refers to the primary key field in another table. So then it is say that what? Foreign key constraints. So here let us look here. Create table persons is one table. So persons is one table which contains person ID, which is an integer data type and which is identified with not null constraints as well as primary key constraints. And the name varchar of 45 not null constraints. Age is an integer data type and the city is varchar data type. And the second table is what? Create table orders. So order ID, integer not null, primary key, and which is also a primary key. So here person ID is also primary key. And order number, integer not null constraints, and person ID integer, foreign key of the person ID which is referenced from first table. The first table person ID is primary key and which is references the person's table in the person's ID. So foreign key of person ID references for the from person's table in the person ID. So this is the way of referencing the column from one table to another table. Referencing of column from one table to another table. So this is all about constraints, how we are applying on the table. So let us look once again how the constraints will be applied. So here what is meant by constraints actually? So constraints are nothing but conditions. It specifies rules, it allows you to enter, and it specifies some certain limits also. So there are two types of columns are there, constraints are there. There are two types of constraints are there. One is column level constraints and the second one is what? Table level constraints. So column level constraints are nothing but what? The constraints which you are applied to the particular column. Then it is called as what? Column level constraints. And the table level constraints are nothing but what? The constraints which you are applied to the entire columns of the table. then it is called as what? Table level constraints. So here the first one, how to create constraints. As like we can create the constraints at the time of creating the table also. So here there are different types of constraints are there. Not null constraints, check constraints, default constraints, primary key constraints, auto increment constraints, unique key constraints, and foreign key constraints. So not null constraints. So not null constraints are nothing but what? The constraints which you are specified to the particular column should not have an empty. Should not have an empty. That means it must be having with at least one value. So here in the example, last name text not null and the first name text not null. That means if the last name and first name columns having any null values, then it shows an error. So definitely the column cannot be null. So it shows the errors like what? Column cannot be null. So that indicates that alerts you to insert at least one value into that last name and the first name. And the second one, check constraints. Check constraints. So here it specifies the condition which you want to enter a values, which you want to enter the values based on the condition it specifies. So here, suppose take an example of age. Here applying check constraints means if you perform that check constraints, then the values which you are entered is to be greater than that condition which you are specified. So here age greater than equal to 18 means the inserted value is definitely it is more than 18. Definitely it is more than 18. And the next one, default constraints. So default constraints are nothing but what? If you are not going to insert any value and if you are specifying that column name as a default constraints, then the column values will be taken as a default mentioned name, default mentioned column value. So here in this example, city varchar of 25 default New York indicates that what? The New York is the default value for the city column for all the values. City column for all the values, the New York will be the default value. And the next, primary key constraints. So primary key constraints are nothing but what? To apply the primary key for the particular column that identifies the entered value should not be the duplicate. The entered value should not be the duplicate. So that means the unique value you have to enter for the column. Unique value entered for the particular column. And the primary key is not a dependent key. And it is a dependent for other keys also. Auto increment key. So if you are not specifying any primary keys, then the values which you are applied, the values which you are inserted will be taken as a auto incremented way, for the specified column. So here in this example, id into not null auto increment means the IDs will be taken as a unique IDs as well as auto incremented way based on the values which you are entered. If you are entered 6 values, then it identifies 6 unique values with the auto incrementation sequence. So based on that, auto increment constraints are applied. And unique constraints. So the unique constraints are nothing but applying unique constraints to the particular column that allows only unique values, that does not allows the duplicate values. So in this example, the brand name will be taken as a unique constraint so that the brand name for one value is not used for another value. So brand name is not used for one value and brand that is not used for another value also. So in the second case, the Peter England is the brand name which is already inserted for the first value, so it is not going to be used for the second time, so it does not allow. So here duplicate entry Peter England for key brand name is existent, so it is generating errors like that. And last, foreign key constraints. So foreign key constraints are nothing but the referencing key constraints which are interacting with the one table to another table. And here it means the foreign key field in one table refers to the primary key field of another table. So foreign key field in one table refers to the primary key field of another table. So that indicates that what the two tables are related to each other. The two tables are related to each other. So this is a referential key for one table to another table. So referential key for one table to another table, one table to another table. So like the way we are going to apply all these constraints on both column level as well as table level. So applying constraints are nothing but to maintain the limits of the data, based on the column values that you are entered, So that is about all about the constraints, the MySQL. Thank you all.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.